It's July 27th, 2026, and today I want to dig into, literally, the one part of this war that Iran built its entire defense strategy around: going underground. For decades, the whole Iranian playbook has been the same. Bury it, put it under a mountain, pour enough concrete over it that nobody can touch it. And for a long time, that worked as a deterrent, because most conventional weapons simply can't reach something buried deep enough. But this war has answered that question in a way Tehran clearly wasn't fully prepared for, and today we're going to walk through exactly how, with what, and what might still be coming. Let's start at the actual foundation of this story, because you can't understand what's happening in July without understanding what happened back in the opening days of this conflict. When the United States entered this war directly, it did so specifically to hit facilities Iran had built underground for exactly this scenario, expecting them to be untouchable. The strikes hit 3 nuclear sites: Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. Iran built Fordow inside a mountain specifically because it's one of the most fortified nuclear sites on Earth, buried deep enough that for years military planners considered it functionally immune to airstrikes. The US used 30 submarine-launched Tomahawk missiles against Natanz and Isfahan, and more than a dozen bunker-buster bombs against Fordow and Natanz. Iran's own nuclear agency confirmed all 3 facilities were struck. That's not a claim from one side, that's confirmed by the country that got hit. So let's actually talk about the bomb that did that, because I think once you understand what this thing physically is, the phrase "safe underground" starts to sound a lot less certain. The weapon used against Fordow was the GBU-57, the Massive Ordnance Penetrator, and it is, without exaggeration, the most powerful conventional bunker-defeating weapon in the entire US arsenal. This thing weighs around 13,600 kilograms, roughly 30,000 pounds. To put that in perspective, that's heavier than a fully loaded school bus, falling from altitude, purpose-built to punch through the earth before it even thinks about exploding. Its hardened steel casing lets it penetrate up to around 60 meters of reinforced concrete, or an estimated 200 feet of solid rock, depending on what it's punching through. And here's the part that I think gets lost in the drama of the footage. It's not designed to just blow up on impact like a normal bomb. It's designed to drill down first, using its own mass and velocity to bury itself deep inside a structure, and only then detonate, so the explosive force collapses the chamber it's inside rather than just cratering the surface above it. That's a fundamentally different kind of weapon than what most people picture when they hear bomb. It's less an explosion and more a controlled, deliberate structural collapse triggered from the inside. Only one aircraft in the American inventory can even carry this thing, the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, and each B-2 can carry a maximum of 2 of these at a time. Reporting at the time indicated around 7 of America's roughly 19 operational B-2s were involved in that opening strike on Iran's nuclear sites, flying all the way from the continental United States with aerial refueling support, hitting their targets and returning home without ever needing a forward base in the region. Think about what that actually means strategically. Iran spent decades and, by outside estimates, tens of billions of dollars building Fordow specifically to be unreachable by anything short of a nuclear weapon. And the American answer wasn't a nuclear weapon at all. It was a conventional bomb, so purpose-built for exactly this scenario, that it rendered Iran's entire underground strategy at that one site obsolete in a single night. Now, let's move to the second chapter of this story, because the underground strikes didn't stop with the opening nuclear strikes back in the spring. In March, CENTCOM confirmed a different kind of underground target entirely. Hardened Iranian anti-ship missile sites along the coastline near the Strait of Hormuz hit with what multiple outlets reported, and CENTCOM itself did not explicitly name in its initial statement, appears to have been the GBU-72, known as the Advanced 5K Penetrator. This is a smaller cousin to the Fordow bomb, about 5,000 pounds instead of 30,000, but it fills an important gap in the American arsenal. It sits between the older GBU-28, which has been in service since the first Gulf War and can punch through around 30 meters of soil or 6 meters of reinforced concrete, and the massive GBU-57 we just talked about. The GBU-72 can be carried by a much wider range of aircraft than the GBU-57, B-1 bombers, F-15E Strike Eagles, and allied F-15I variants, which matters enormously for how often and how flexibly the US can actually use bunker-defeating weapons in a sustained campaign like this one, rather than saving them for a single dramatic night. The Joint Chiefs. Chairman General Dan Kane personally confirmed at a Pentagon briefing that these weapons were used against underground Iranian storage facilities holding coastal defense cruise missiles, the exact weapons Iran has spent years positioning to threaten. Shipping through the strait, his quote was direct. These weapons are, in his words, bespokely designed to get through concrete and rock and function after penetrating those barriers. That's about as plain a confirmation as the Pentagon gets. So here's the pattern that should be jumping out at you. Iran built a layered underground defense strategy, the deepest, most critical assets like Fordow buried under a mountain, and then a second layer of hardened coastal storage sites holding the anti-ship missiles, meant to choke off the Strait of Hormuz. And the United States has now demonstrated, with 2 separate purpose-built weapon systems, that it can reach both layers. That's not a small thing. That's the entire foundation of Iran's deterrence doctrine getting dismantled piece by piece in public, on camera. Let's bring this up to the current moment, because the story isn't finished, it's accelerating. CENTCOM has now confirmed 13 consecutive nights of strikes as of this week, with the most recent wave completing at 9 p.m. Eastern on July the 23rd, targeting Iranian military command centers, drone storage facilities, communication networks, coastal surveillance sites, and maritime capabilities. Ian, reporting this week from Axios, cited by multiple outlets, said that a U.S. B-1 long-range bomber struck Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps targets in Iran on Tuesday. Notably, CENTCOM's own public statement for that particular round did not explicitly mention the B-1 by name, which is worth flagging clearly. We have a named source report of a B-1 mission, but not an official CENTCOM confirmation naming that specific airframe for that specific night. That gap matters, and I'm calling it out rather than smoothing it over, because the honest version of this story includes the parts we can't fully nail down yet. Here's where the underground story gets genuinely interesting again, and where I think the title of today's video earns its keep. Reporting from just a few days ago describes Iran having moved key nuclear equipment into a deeply buried mountain bunker. Separate reporting has referred to this location informally as Pickaxe Mountain, and President Trump himself has publicly referenced this exact site, saying it's, in his words, primed for a big fat shot. Read between the lines there for a second. If Iran is moving sensitive equipment into a mountain bunker, specifically because it thinks that location is safer than where the equipment was before, that's Iran's own leadership making a bet that this particular piece of geology will do what Fordow's mountain was supposed to do and didn't. And the fact that the sitting American president is already talking publicly about this exact site by name tells you Washington is well aware of that bet and hasn't ruled out calling it. Whether that strike actually happens, when it happens, and what weapon gets used if it does, none of that is something I can confirm to you today. And anyone telling you with total certainty that a specific strike on this mountain is imminent is speculating past what's actually been said publicly. What I can tell you, based on Iran's own track record in this war, is that we moved it somewhere deeper has not been a winning strategy so far. Let's take a step back and talk about why bunker buster weapons work the way they do, because I think understanding the physics actually helps you understand why this entire Iranian strategy was always more fragile than it looked from the outside. A bunker buster's whole design philosophy is built around one insight. It's much easier to build a bomb that survives the process of punching through rock and concrete than it is to build a bunker that survives every possible weapon that could ever be built against it. Iran's engineers had to guess years in advance exactly how deep was deep enough, exactly how thick the concrete needed to be against a weapon that didn't necessarily exist yet when they poured the first foundation. American weapons. Designers, meanwhile, get to look at exactly what Iran built, study the geology, study the construction, and design a weapon specifically calibrated to defeat it. That's an inherently unfair fight in the attacker's favor, and it's the core reason why buried under a mountain has stopped being the kind of guarantee it used to represent in military planning circles. Let's also be fair and talk about what bunker busters can't do, because an honest analysis doesn't oversell the capability either. These weapons are expensive, limited in number, and require very specific aircraft and mission profiles to employ. You can't just casually toss a 30,000-pound bomb off a fighter jet. The B-2 fleet is small, precious, and can't be risked constantly. Every one of these missions requires real planning, aerial refueling logistics, and accepting real risk to air crews and airframes that are difficult to replace. And critically, a bunker buster is only as good as the intelligence behind it. You have to actually know where the target is, how deep it sits, and what it's made of, or you can drop the most sophisticated weapon in the world and still miss the actual thing you were trying to destroy. So when Iran moves equipment to a new location, part of what that actually buys them, even temporarily, is time and uncertainty for American targeting. Not permanent safety, but a real complication that has to be worked through before any strike happens. Now let's talk about the broader platform picture for this campaign, because the underground story connects directly to the aircraft doing the work night after night. The B-1B Lancer, which reporting this week says was used against IRGC targets, is a supersonic heavy bomber that can carry roughly 24 2,000-pound class bombs or dozens of cruise missiles, and it's become one of the workhorses of this later phase of the campaign, specifically because, unlike the B-2, it can be used more routinely without burning through America's small stealth bomber fleet. The B-52, which is also featured throughout this war, brings a different strength. Extreme range and payload, capable of launching cruise missiles from well outside contested airspace, so it never has to expose itself directly over defended Iranian territory. And then there's the F-15E Strike Eagle, which is the platform most closely associated with actually carrying the GBU-72 in the confirmed March strikes on those coastal missile sites. A fighter that can fly precision strike missions with far more flexibility and far less logistical overhead than a heavy bomber sortie. Layer electronic warfare aircraft in ahead of all of them, jamming and suppressing Iranian air defense radar so these strike aircraft can operate with dramatically reduced risk, and you get the same doctrine we've talked about on this channel before. Clear the electronic corridor first, then send in whichever aircraft is actually matched to the target's specific hardness and depth. Let's talk honestly about where Iran stands after all of this, because a serious analysis has to include the other side of the ledger. Iran has not been rendered defenseless. It has continued to generate coordinated retaliatory strikes against multiple countries simultaneously throughout this war, and it retains, by its own officials' repeated public statements, a significant portion of its military capability that it says it hasn't used yet. Some of that is almost certainly genuine rhetoric meant to project strength it may not fully have anymore, but some of it is probably true, because a country with Iran's resources and decades of investment in dispersed, hardened infrastructure doesn't lose everything in 13 nights of strikes, no matter how effective those strikes have been. The honest picture is that Iran's deepest, most symbolically important sites have proven vulnerable in ways its own planners likely didn't expect, but its broader dispersed missile and drone infrastructure across the country is a much bigger, messier problem that takes sustained pressure over weeks and months to actually degrade, not a single dramatic strike. All right, let's move to the global roundup section, because there's real news elsewhere connected to this same broader moment. Qatar's Ministry of Transport lifted restrictions on maritime vessel activity in Qatari waters this weekend, restrictions that had been in place since the US and Iran resumed trading strikes in early July. A genuinely positive, concrete signal that at least one part of the Gulf is stabilizing even as the broader war grinds on. Saudi Arabia intercepted additional ballistic missiles fired from Yemen this week, with warnings issued for the coastal city of Yanbu, before officials said the danger had passed with no reported damage. And there's a claim from Iran's Tasnim news agency of a cyber attack against what it called the digital eye of CENTCOM, a claim that remains unconfirmed by any U.S. official at the time of filming, and exactly the kind of dramatic, unverifiable claim from a state media outlet that deserves real skepticism rather than automatic repetition. Now let's get into the strategic analysis, because I think there's a bigger picture forming here that connects every thread we've talked about today. Iran's entire national security doctrine for the past several decades has rested on one core assumption, that geographic depth and hardened construction could functionally neutralize the West's conventional military advantage. Bury it deep enough, spread it out widely enough, and no matter how much better American technology is, it simply won't be able to physically reach the thing that matters most. That assumption has been the load-bearing wall of Iranian strategic planning. And this war, more than any single event in decades, has put a very public, very visible crack directly through that wall. Fordow, built specifically to be untouchable, got touched. Hardened coastal missile storage, built specifically to survive a first strike, got hit with a purpose-designed bomb months later, and now reports suggest Iran is moving its most sensitive remaining equipment into yet another mountain, hoping this next location holds where the others didn't, while the sitting American president has already named that mountain publicly. If you're inside Iran's military planning apparatus right now, the psychological weight of that pattern has to be enormous, independent of whether any specific future strike ever actually happens. Every bunker starts to feel less like a fortress and more like a countdown. That has real strategic implications beyond just this war. Other countries around the world that have built their own deterrence strategies around buried, hardened facilities are watching this exact playbook get demonstrated in real time. If depth and concrete stop being a reliable guarantee against a sufficiently determined and well-resourced adversary that changes calculations far beyond just Tehran, it's a live demonstration for every nation that has bet its most sensitive military and nuclear infrastructure on the assumption that if you just bury it deep enough, it becomes someone else's problem to ever reach. This war may end up being remembered less for any single strike and more for permanently updating the global assumptions about what safe underground actually means in the age of purpose-built penetrator weapons. Where does this go next? I think the things worth watching are the same threads we keep coming back to, viewed through this specific lens. Does the reported movement of equipment into that second mountain site actually draw a strike? And if it does it demonstrate the same result Fordow did? Does CENTCOM's target list keep shifting toward command and communications infrastructure? suggesting a push toward forcing a decisive outcome rather than continued attrition? And does Iran adjust its underlying strategy at all, dispersing, further building even deeper, or accepting that no amount of concrete is going to fully solve this problem for them anymore? Those are the questions I'll keep bringing you real confirmed answers to as they develop, rather than speculation dressed up as certainty.